I'm Hobson Wildenthal, the Provost at the University of Texas at Dallas. It's my privilege and pleasure to welcome all of you to the Fall 2005 Burton Einsprüch Holocaust Lecture. I'll say just a few words about how important and intrinsic to the University of Texas at Dallas the Holocaust Studies program is, and of course how important the Einsprüch Lecture is to the program and to the university. UTD has been lucky enough and wise enough for the last 15 years and more to be the home of a truly dynamic program in the study of the Holocaust. And this program is, in our view, deeply intrinsic to the essence of the university, and that it provides our faculty and our students with the opportunity to learn and continually learn about one of the world historic events in human history. And as such, studying and teaching and researching the Holocaust is, in the university's view, one of the most important things we do. Of course, Holocaust Studies is principally oriented at UTD students learning from our program's offerings. But the program is also important because it provides us a unique opportunity to interact with our larger Dallas community. And in particular, the Einsprüch Lecture Series is the focal point of that interaction. And over my 13 years, the lecture series has hosted the great minds of the world, scholars and thinkers and artists who have brought luster to UTD and enriched the Dallas community through the lectures. So I want to welcome all of you, many of you again, as I know many of you are faithful attendees to the lecture and to UTD and to interacting with our program. It is now my privilege to introduce the chairman of the advisory board of the Holocaust Studies program, Sally Belofsky. Sally?
It's truly amazing and wonderful that this great university, known for its excellence in science and engineering, this university that confers more computer science degrees than any other university in the United States, is also the home of one of the most unique and highly respected Holocaust studies programs in the country. And this would never have been possible without the vision and the support and the leadership of Hobson Wildenthal, who just welcomed you. And we can't say enough about Hobson. Dr. Wildenthal's partner in all that has been accomplished here at UTD is Professor Zsuzsi Ashvat, who holds the Leah and Paul Lewis Chair of Holocaust Studies. It is she who created, develops, and teaches this renowned program, and she will introduce our guest speaker in a few moments. But since I mentioned the Leah and Paul Lewis Chair in Holocaust Studies, I'd like us to meet the family that contributed and endowed that chair that Zsuzsi Ashvat holds, and that's Mimi Lewis Barnett and her husband, Mitch Barnett, and their daughter Shelley is right here. So let's say hello. What makes this Holocaust Studies program different here at UTD is that the students are offered Masters of Arts degrees, Masters of Arts in Teaching, and PhD degrees, so that over time, students who have obtained these degrees have become scholars and teachers of Holocaust in high schools, colleges, and museums all across the country, and more will follow. We had the honor and the privilege of having a small luncheon before this lecture begins, and we got a chance to meet many of these graduate students. And I can tell you, we were so impressed with their enthusiasm, their intelligence, their brilliance, and we like to make that an event from now on because it stimulates us and encourages us to do more on behalf of the program. Well, let me say this. The mission of the Holocaust Studies program is to teach future generations. To teach future generations not only the history of the Holocaust, but also the lessons of tolerance, compassion, and human rights for all people. When you entered the hall, I think you received a brochure about today's program, and inside there's a smaller brochure that says, Teaching the Past, Changing the Future. Today, we have an opportunity to change the future because of the strong support shown by this community. Dr. Wildenthal, Dr. Ashvat, and Dennis Krautz, the Dean of the School of Arts and Humanities, are committed to augmenting and strengthening and broadening our current program in the fall of 2006. They will add faculty and new complementary courses and open up classes for more highly motivated, academically gifted students from all across the country. You and I can help make this happen. We can make a difference. We can make a difference by supporting and contributing to the 2005-2006 annual Friends of the Holocaust Studies Program campaign here at UTD. We have an opportunity today of demonstrating with our dollars that we are truly partners with UTD and that UTD can continue to count on our help to help make their dreams and plans for the future of this Holocaust Studies program come true. It's important also for us to know that in addition to the annual Friends campaign, which supports ongoing operations, this Holocaust Studies program, like all great academic programs, must also have a dependable source of income from its own dedicated endowment fund. Tuition and state funding is never enough. Well, thanks to the generosity of Ed Ackerman and his family, who last November established the Ackerman Endowment Challenge Fund, we are well on our way to establishing a permanent Holocaust Studies program endowment. Contributions are growing steadily, and we hope that by February, when we'll have our next lecture, we'll have an important announcement of achievement to make to you. Ed Ackerman is with us today, and I would like for us to recognize his generosity. Ed. So let us all join together to make this 2005-2006 annual campaign and the Ackerman Endowment Challenge Fund a real partnership between us, the community, and UTD. Please pick up a brochure if you haven't already done so, and show your support by making your pledge today. I want to also thank you all for coming today, for your continued interest, and for your loyal support. It's now my honor and pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Zsuzsi Ashvat, UTD's own internationally recognized historian, author, lecturer, Holocaust survivor, professor of literary studies and the history of ideas, and the Leah and Paul Lewis Chair of Holocaust Studies, who will introduce our distinguished guest. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these introductions and for your support and for the possibility that we can have here these Holocaust studies, which does enrich the students and the general audience as well. Audiences, I wanted to say, I think that we are tremendously lucky because on the one hand we have the support of the provost, a unique and fantastic support, and at the same time the support of the community. I would like at this point introduce Dr. Berger, who is an internationally known scholar of the Holocaust. He is the eminent scholar, chair of Holocaust Studies at Florida Atlantic University. He also is director of the Institute of Values and Violence after Auschwitz at the same place, and also professor of Holocaust Studies and Judaic Studies. He has written much and wonderful books. I hope you had the chance to see them and you even had the chance to buy some of them. He is famous from his book, The Children of Job. He's discussing in them the children of survivors. And he has edited a book with his wife, Naomi Berger, The Second Generation Witnesses. And this is on the second generation of Germans and of some German children and some Jewish children alike. He also has written other books, Crisis and Covenant, and he is author of many articles and essays in a number of books. He's going to talk to us in a minute, and you will hear him, how wonderful and what a great lecturer and scholar he is. Thank you very much. Before you come, Alan, I am sorry to come back, because I have made one mistake, and that is I wanted to speak about Alan Berger, and I have neglected to say the very person who has enabled us to have this opportunity, and that is Dr. Einspruch, who has created this lecture series, who is the endower of this lecture series, and who has for very many years been the person who is here helping us and making it possible that all these wonderful scholars from all over the world could come. So let me please step back once and let us please say thank you to Dr. Einspruch.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for that lovely introduction, which I'm sure my father would have loved and my mother would have believed. And it is a delight, just a sheer delight to be here. I will not repeat all of the acknowledgments or thanks, but individually, because that would probably take the whole time. But believe me, I am grateful, and the community, both here and the wider community, should be very grateful as well. Now, you all know what it means when a professor takes off his watch. Nothing. But I'm going to do that anyway. Robert Krell, a Jewish child hidden at age 2 in Holland, and today a retired prominent child psychiatrist, tells a story, an incident that happened immediately after the war when he was 7 years old. He was taken to a temple by an uncle, and the boy shakes hands with those men assembled. And at his uncle's urging, he says, who he is. Tell him who you are, Robbie. And Robbie says, I'm a Catholic. I'm a Catholic. The men laugh heartily. They think it's very amusing. The Jewish settings seem very strange to Robbie and very, very uncomfortable. He didn't exactly know what was going on. Far removed from the world of the Munichs, the foster parents with whom he had been hidden from age 2 until age 5. Feeling out of place, Robbie Krell later reflected on the experience, and he said he realized that all the hands that he shook that day were hands of survivors. But then he wondered, what am I? Am I a survivor? I didn't know who I was. Where did I belong? The story, I think, focuses attention on several crucial matters for hidden children. First and foremost is the matter of memory and its corollary, identity. What do I remember? What does that memory make me? The children went into hiding when they were too young to have formulated a strong identity, and frequently emerged from their hiding places with their Christian identity more strongly formed and focused than their Jewish identity. Moreover, even in the case of the certain of the so-called convent children, and I'll return to this issue of convent children in a little bit, even in these cases, there are examples of teenage Jewish females who chose to be baptized after the war, after everything was over. Although the hidden children were not theologians in the formal sense of the word, they did come to some conclusions which had very important theological meanings. For example, some of them felt betrayed and abandoned by the Jewish God who saved neither their parents nor the Jewish people. There are, for example, certain instances of outright rejection of Judaism, exemplified in the statement of a 9-year-old girl who proclaimed, "The Jewish God killed my parents. He burned my home. Jesus Christ saved me." Now, it's for sure that some of these sentiments were picked up in the hiding homes. This is what some of the children heard. On the other hand, in the minds of some of the hidden children, Judaism was bad because it caused the child to be separated from her or his parents, and that's very understandable. Christianity was good because it meant being protected, very simply. Expelled from their childhood, hidden children were denied the luxury of emotional security, which stemmed from concealing their core identity. In what follows, I want to do a couple of things. First, I want to reflect on the role of hiddenness in Judaism. What does Judaism have to say about hiddenness, about hiding? Then I want to say a few words about the role of silence and how it impacts on memory among hidden children. Then I'm going to mention a couple of memoirs. Ruth Kapp Hartz's memoir, Your Name is Renee. It's on the bibliography sheet, which some of you may have. And Nechama Tech's memoir, Dry Tears. And then I want to say a few words about a film, Miriam Abramowitz and Esther Hoffenberg's film, As If It Were Yesterday. As If It Were Yesterday, which deals specifically with the issue of hidden children. And then I want to conclude by offering a reflection on the contemporary legacy of hidden children for our deeply troubled world. Now, what about hiding and hiddenness? Before I get into that, I just want to state the basic facts. Let's be clear about the nature of the loss, at least in terms of the statistics. Approximately 1.5 of the 1.6 million Jewish children under the age of 17 who were alive in 1939 were dead 6 years later. That comes out to the chilling fact that 6 to 7% of the Jewish children lived through that perilous time. Children, of course, were hidden in a variety of places, some in convents, some in cellars, some in pigsties, some in monasteries. Hitler was far more effective than the Pharaoh and implemented what Haman could only dream of accomplishing. Now, how about Judaism? What does it have to say about hiding? Well, the first hidden child in Jewish history was Moses. Remember Moses? Pretty important figure in our history. The fact that he survives by being a hidden infant assures nothing less than the continuity of the tradition. We wouldn't be here if that didn't happen. Legend also speaks of those Jewish children who were to be buried in the walls of Egyptian pyramids. And instead of that dreadful fate, being hidden in the pyramids, the archangel Michael, who is like God, comes to intervene and rescue the children. This legend, of course, is in stark contrast to what fate was in store for the hidden children in the Holocaust. There, neither God nor angels intervened. A few, very few, precious, righteous people intervened and helped. In the Talmud and the Jewish mystical tradition, there's another example of hiddenness, and this has to do with the so-called Lamed Vav Tzadikim, the 36 hidden righteous people. Although usually neither recognized nor appreciated, these 36 righteous ensure the existence of the world through their merit. I'll return to this shortly, at the end of the paper, actually. Now, what about types of hiding during the Holocaust itself? Well, the historian Deborah Dwork distinguishes two types of hiding. One is in hiding and hidden. In hiding and hidden. There, these people concealed their physical presence. Anne Frank is probably the best known example of children who are in hiding and hidden. But there's another type of hiding, and that is those children who are in hiding and visible. Now, how in the world can you be in hiding and visible? Some of our students do it when they sleep through classes, but nobody here, I know that. In hiding and visible means that you pass as a Christian. You're passing because you have blonde hair, blue eyes. You don't look Jewish. You speak Polish without a Yiddish accent. Nechama Tech, about whom we'll have a few words to say, and her memoir, Dry Tears, is an example of a young girl who was in hiding but visible because she looked Christian. She was visible. Now, sometimes children experienced both types. They were in hiding and hidden and in hiding and visible. For each of these kinds of hiding, the children experienced what Ivan Karamazov wrote about. And he said, in a world without God, everything is possible. And these children experienced that. I want to say a brief word about Anne Frank's diary. Although it's the best known diary, I think, it's hardly exemplary because Anna Frank was very different from other child diarists. In the first place, she hid with her family. In the second place, she had a lot of writing material, or sufficient writing material, that enabled her to record her experiences, her thoughts, her feelings. And Finally, and most important, she was a marvelously gifted writer, a very insightful young woman. More characteristic, however, of these writings was the gnawing and ubiquitous fear, anxiety, and feelings of abandonment, which one finds in these diaries. Incidentally, just a note, a bibliographical note, I think the finest recent study is one by Alexandra Zapruder, Z-A-P-R-U-D-E-R, called Salvaged Pages, in which she brings together, for the first time, excerpts of diaries, many of which were not published earlier in English. And I think it's an invaluable resource for people interested in this topic. Now, what about hidden children and the trap of memory? Who are hidden children? Remember Robbie Krell, was I a survivor? What was I? Hidden children suffered during the Holocaust, but they learned early on the importance of concealing themselves. They were deeply scarred by their experience, but what was their experience? For example, the world knew about the adult survivors. Those were the ones in the camps. They suffered. We had newsreels. We had eyewitness testimony. Robbie Krell, the man whom I quoted at the beginning of my remarks, has this to say about it. This group, the adult survivors, 17 and over, demanded and commanded the attention of the world. For us, we, the hidden children, were another survivor population, but nobody knew about us. He says the years after liberation were years of anxiety and despair. The survivors, the adult survivors, told the child survivors that they were lucky because they hadn't been in a concentration camp. Don't talk about it, the children were told. Get on with your life. Yafa Eliach, many of you have probably heard her name. She herself was a hidden child. She created the Tower of Faces at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. She calls hidden children both insiders and outsiders at the kingdom of death. Insiders and outsiders at the kingdom of death. The second thing about hidden children is they found themselves in a very paradoxical situation. They were hidden not because of any wrong they had done, not because of any act they had committed, but because of the enormous moral wrongs that were being committed by the world. So the hidden children had to embrace this silence while hiding from a world that was morally chaotic and which was determined to exterminate every living Jewish child. After the war, these children continued to be silent. As a matter of fact, the first, or at least among the earliest, hidden child memoirs that appeared was a memoir called When Memory Comes by Saul Friedlander. And that only appeared 33 years later. 33 years. Now, there's a couple of reasons for this long delay. First of all, the hidden children had to just gather fragments of memory. Secondly, what they remembered was very painful. It meant recalling the loss of parents who were murdered, or family members, other family members, relatives who disappeared, never to reappear. Andre Stein, who himself was a hidden child, writes in his memoir, Hidden Children, Forgotten Survivors of the Holocaust, in most cases, hidden children had only two absolutes to respect: silence and invisibility. Silence and invisibility. Now, when you think of children, those of you who have children, you think of laughter, tears, joy, exuberance, spontaneity, hallmarks of childhood. These all had to be stilled for the hidden children. You couldn't laugh because you might give yourself away. You couldn't cry for the same reason. You had to be as if you didn't exist. Now, the second kind of silence was the silence after the war. This kind of silence is destructive. It condemned the children to a solitary kind of existence, solitary suffering, and deprived them of having their experience, their loss, validated. Nobody said, yes, I understand what happened to you. I hear it, and I can see and feel your own anxieties and pain. The hidden children remained then, in a real sense, hidden for many years. It's worth noting, I think, in this context, what the Israeli novelist Aaron Appelfeld had to say about silence and hiding. There was a desire, he writes, to forget, to bury the bitter memories deep in the bedrock of the soul, in a place where no stranger's eye, not even our own, could get to them. One must not talk, one must not tell. So Appelfeld adds to the complexity of the situation because he's suggesting that in a sense there is an internal silencing, a self-silencing of these memories. Now this began to change slowly. In 1978 in Vancouver, testimonies began to be taken from hidden children. It really changed in a major way in 1991 when there was a hidden children gathering in New York City. And many times when the hidden children showed up at this gathering, they discovered that others had had the same experience, that they weren't the only ones. There was a chance to exchange memories, to talk about their experience. This was very liberating psychologically. Children had to abandon their names. But what's a name anyway? A name is a destiny, at least according to biblical thinking. Your name is your destiny. But listen to this. In Saul Friedlander's memoir that I mentioned just recently, When Memory Comes, following his baptism in the Church of Notre Dame, Friedlander recalls the difficulty he had at age 9 getting used to his Christian name of Paul Henri. He writes the following: "At home I had been called Pavel, or rather Pavelchek, the usual Czech diminutive, or else Gogol, not to mention a whole string of affectionate nicknames. I had become Paul, which for a child was something quite different. As Paul, I didn't feel like Pavelchek anymore, but Paul Henri was worse still. I had crossed a line and was now on the other side. French requires that the Paul that I had been, and in short, it is impossible to know which name I am. Am I Paul? Am I Saul? Am I Shaul? I didn't know who I was." The situation grows even more complicated when one understands that within the Jewish community there were tensions. Friedlander, for example, had come from an assimilationist Jewish family. They weren't religious, they didn't know Yiddish, they were assimilationist. So he writes about this. "Many of the children at the home where I was placed were pious. Among them was a boy named Jacob, who noticed immediately that his prayers were as foreign to me as his Yiddish, his yarmulke, his skullcap, and his earlocks. Friedlander was called by the other Jews a goy, a negative, derisive term for a Christian or a non-Jew. He was tied to a tree and beaten. Writing of this episode many years later, he observes that he was beaten by Jewish children because they thought I was different from them. So I belonged nowhere. I belong nowhere. In reaction to this trauma, the young boy began wetting his bed and was transferred to the baby section of the house. He refers to his time at the home as a period of continual suffering because of being separated from his parents. Today, Friedlander is a distinguished scholar, an Israeli citizen, who spends 6 months of the year in Geneva and 6 months teaching on the West Coast at UCLA. Now, I want to say a couple of things about these memoirs that I've mentioned. The first of them is Your Name is Renee by Ruth Kapp Hartz. Renee was born in Germany, but her story consists of what happened to her as she was hiding in a convent in France. And incidentally, Renee Kapp Hartz, after the war, came to America, taught French at a high school in Philadelphia, and told her story to her Catholic student, Stacy Kretzmeyer, who authored the book about Renee's life. So she learned at age 5 a twofold lesson. It was dangerous to be Jewish because there were Nazis and collaborators everywhere, and she must not use her real name. Now she's taken to the convent because that's the only place she's going to be safe. What happens in the convent? Well, she comes into contact with a world that she has no prior knowledge of. The first time she saw a sister, she was petrified. Somebody in a black habit, black outfit, wimple, didn't know what it was, terrified. But it got worse because her mother was unable to communicate with Renee, because to visit her would in fact imperil the child. The mother might be followed. Other people at the convent would know that she was Jewish. So what did the mother do? She sent a Hanukkah gift to Renee via a friend of hers, and the friend goes to the convent and she gives Renee a piece of Hanukkah gelt, chocolate candy wrapped in gold. And so Renee then realizes that her mother is alive, and she's elated. But something happened. The sister saw that Renee had a piece of candy. Where did you get it? Well, the little girl couldn't tell the sister because that would imperil the mother, also the person who brought the candy, and also herself. So the sister said, "You must have stolen it." And the little girl knew that she didn't steal it, but she couldn't say what really happened. So finally she confessed that she stole it. And it caused her a great deal of anxiety because she knew that she was lying, but lying in this case to save at least 3 lives, not least of which was her own. In the case of the convent, Renee was saved. The sister saved her life. But I want to say something about what's come to be known as convent children. The Jewish children, especially the girls, had typically a much richer vocabulary and were very well behaved, richer vocabulary than the non-Jews. This was almost always a dead giveaway. If you spoke well, if you had good manners, that could have been trouble because you were different. And if Nazism was about anything, it was about exterminating the other. Anybody who was different could not live. A couple of other things about Your Name is Renee. At age 6, a Protestant pastor, when Renee was 6, came to take her father to a hiding place. This pastor saved Renee's father's life. What was Renee's reaction? I hated him, she writes, because he took my father away. What do you expect when someone is 6 years old? One of the many paradoxes engendered by the Holocaust is that the children felt betrayed by their parents because they felt abandoned, felt angry at people who took the parents away to save their lives, not realizing what was going on. Now, the other thing that happened with Renee before she went into the convent was this. The family practiced hiding, which meant that she couldn't go out and play with the other little girls. And she wondered about that. Why can't I be like everybody else? Why can't I go outside and play? These are some of the issues that kind of get lost in the larger drama of the Holocaust, but I think are very important for us to know about. The psychological wounds of staying at the convent were also very great. Ruth Kapp Hartz writes in her memoir about waking up thinking that her parents were dead, and she had this sick feeling in her stomach. The first time she thought that her parents were dead was when one of the sisters said to her, "You're now an orphan." At first she didn't know what an orphan was, so she had to ask one of the other girls, and the other girl told her. So her parents were dead. She was in this strange place with a strange religion and with a name that wasn't hers. So what to do? Well, she persevered and she survived. Afterward, she was reunited with her parents, both of whose lives were saved because they were hidden by sympathetic Christian people. And what happened after their reunion? Well, the silence continued, echoing what would later become a hallmark of the relationship between survivor parents and second-generation children. There was silence because each side thought they were helping the other by not speaking about it. But that wasn't the case at all, because instead of sparing each other's pain, they just increased it. Ruth believed that her mother would never believe the nightmarish experience that she had in the convent. Her mother believed that Ruth should be spared her ordeal, the mother's ordeal, in hiding. So both of them were silent and therefore continued the wound. Now, what happened when life returned to normality, whatever that is that Ruth began going to school where she experienced anti-Semitic behavior not only on the part of her fellow students, but also her teacher. Now, the situation becomes even more complex because Ruth's parents go into her room one day and they find her praying the rosary. She's Jewish. The years in the convent had taught her about the rosary, and they didn't know what to do about that. Well, obviously, things worked out for Ruth. And she has spoken at Florida Atlantic University, by the way. I want to add an aside here. I think it's both enraging and pathetic to note at this point that there's a lack of any official recognition of the hidden children as Holocaust survivors. In France especially, I'll tell you what's going on in France. Hidden children there are seeking justice in the area of restitution. Let's put aside for a moment the issue or the question of what possibly could constitute reparation or restitution for a lost or stolen childhood. And let's instead see what the official response of the French government was to this request for restitution. Well, the French officials tell child survivors that since they were young children and too young to work, there is nothing to compensate them for since they lost no work. certain officials treat the children like beggars and stall and delay for years, just like the Germans. So, is it any wonder that there's a sense of rage among the hidden children? Let me say a couple of words now about, and how am I doing for time? Oh, 10 more minutes, my God. Let me take my tie off and relax. Everything is wonderful. Then you must read really Nechama Tech's memoir, Dry Tears. It's a story really of a lost childhood. Lost. Tech's memoir does many things, but among the things it does is to tell about the crucial role of religion in being able to survive in hiding. For example, one needed to be thoroughly conversant with the rituals of Catholicism, because if you weren't, you were dead. It's very simple. You had to know how and when to cross yourself, how and when to say the rosary. To remain a stranger to Catholicism, observes Nechama Tech, was dangerous. She and her older sister heard stories about Jews who lost their lives because of religious ignorance. So what did they do, she and her sister? Well, they practiced memorizing prayers and repeatedly testing one another. That was their way of surviving. Before the war, she and her sister attended a private school which de-emphasized the religious aspect of Judaism. Although her mother was religious, her father was not. Since they were Jews, they were expelled from the school, and what her parents did was to hire a tutor for them, a non-Jewish tutor, who incidentally later on was beaten to death by the Nazis. But Tech observes that studying, the mere act of studying a poem, could have gotten her murdered, because Jewish children could be shot for studying. If you can believe how life must have been under those conditions, then you have some idea of what the hidden children were dealing with. Tech writes movingly about three main issues in her experience. Lost childhood, Jewish identity, and Polish anti-Semitism. Now, she says, all my life revolved around hiding thoughts, hiding feelings, hiding my activities, and hiding information. She became a double person, at home a Jew, and in the streets a Christian. But this dichotomous self was profoundly wrenching for her. She became oddly accustomed, she writes, to anti-Semitic statements that she heard. For example, she writes of seeing a group of Jewish workers, slave workers, being marched in the street, and thinking, guarded by heavily armed German soldiers, and she remembers thinking, if dead people could walk, this is how they would walk. Her Polish friends ridiculed the Jews. Nechama did not respond to that ridicule. But in the privacy of her own room that night, she wept tears of helplessness, she writes. She also had an older friend, a non-Jewish friend, a girl, Janka, to whom she felt especially close. And one day they were playing, and the older girl told Nechama a story about Jews murdering Christian children and using their blood to bake matzah. This sounds very bizarre, except it's still a charge that one heard unto the middle of the 20th century. And it's still a charge that one hears in certain Arab countries these days. Now, Nechama, who by this time had changed her name for the third time, is stunned by the accusation. And she says reflexively, well, have you ever seen this? Now, to us, it's a normal question. But that could have cost her her life. Could have cost her her life. But the older girl says to her, oh, they do it secretly. You're so young, you don't know anything. And that's how her life was saved. Now, the complexity of Polish attitudes toward the Jews was very well done in Nechama Tech's book. She writes of a family, the Homars, who took the Techs in for a price, and they saved their lives. However, at the end of the war, when the Techs were leaving the Homars' home, the Homars said to the Techs, please don't tell anybody you were here. They didn't want the neighbors to know that they hid a Jewish family. I want to say, in probably the 6.3 minutes I have left, I want to refer you to a film called As If It Were Yesterday. As If It Were Yesterday. I think it's probably the best film on the issues that confronted hidden children that I've ever seen. And among the speakers in this film, it takes place in Belgium during the war, or rather the hiding was hiding in Belgium. One of the speakers is Maurice Ibert, who was placing Jewish children, himself Jewish. And Ibert talks about the heartbreaking scenes. This one hidden Jewish child died of diphtheria. And he writes of having to go to where the parents and grandparents were hiding to tell them what happened. And he said, it was very difficult. I walked in and I said to them, your young girl was like a soldier. She fought for us, but she's dead. Whereupon the mother began screaming, the father hit his head against the wall, and it was terrible. But he also told another anecdote, an episode that happened. They placed a young child with a peasant family. And the head of the household called Monsieur Ibert and said, you must come and take this young boy immediately. He's a thief. He's a thief. What happened? And the peasant said, he stole the Jesus icon from the Christmas creche. So Ibert goes to the family and he talks to the boy, who's maybe 6 or 7 years old, and says, I'm going to talk to you man to man. Why did you do this? What did you do? And of course the child at first said, nothing, I didn't do anything. And Monsieur Ibert says, don't you know that they'll kill us if they find the Germans will kill us? These good people are taking you. Why did you do this? So finally the youngster breaks down and he says, well, I knew that Jesus was Jewish, and if the Nazis found him, they might hurt him. So I took him and hid him. And so that is really a very poignant story. But for the most part, they didn't end that way. But speaking of ending, let me conclude by right now. What is the legacy of the hidden children? What lessons can the rest of us learn from them? Let us begin by stating one simple fact. As the ranks of the adult survivors dwindle, hidden children are increasingly assuming a central role in bringing the story of the Holocaust to our attention. What these now adult children have to teach the rest of us seems to me quite basic. In my view, there are four main messages. First, the coping skills and resilience of the Holocaust's youngest surviving witnesses stands as both a testimony, message of hope, and a searing indictment of those who stood by and did nothing. The hope comes because amidst a bleak and hopeless landscape, these children survived. Second, the hidden children are special. As Nechama Tech observes, after all, the majority of the Jewish children were selected to be murdered. We were selected to be rescued. The meaning of this life-affirming selection stands in absolute contrast to that other fatal selection practiced by the Nazis and their helpers. We need to ponder the implications of selection for life. Third, and connected to this, is the necessity to study altruistic behavior. What motivated those few who did help? Why did they do it? What motivated André Trocmé in Le Chambon? What motivated Maurice Ibert in Belgium and others? What motivated Oskar Schindler, for that matter? Are there traits that they share in common? Can altruistic behavior be taught? Fourth, those who as children were abused in their hiding homes do not necessarily become abusers themselves. There's a very high percentage of hidden children who enter the helping professions. They are very successful. For example, Jaffa Eliak, who was hidden in a pigsty in Poland, is now a professor, creator of this Tower of Life, author of books. Abe Foxman was a hidden child in Poland and is now the head of the Anti-Defamation League. And there's one other person you may have heard of, Professor Ashvath, who spent some time in the Holocaust as a hidden child. So some of these folks turned out pretty well, I would say. The testimony and post-war experience of the hidden children are important for historians of the Holocaust. By speaking of the past, hidden children have begun the process of memory and mourning while bearing witness for the future. You know, earlier I mentioned the response of Judaism to hiddenness. And in conclusion, I want to respond or return to these responses. There is a midrash, for example, that states that ever since the prophet Elijah, yet another hidden figure in the history of Judaism, ascended to heaven, all he does is go around the world chronicling tales of Jewish suffering. When the Messiah comes, states the text, Elijah will give him the book of Jewish suffering. Moreover, this book will become a new Torah. The experience and witness of the hidden children will, I believe, doubtless comprise a special chapter in this book. Although the paradigms of sacrality embodied in the figure of Moses and the legends concerning the 36 hidden righteous people seem overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of evil unleashed in the Holocaust, let us dare to see if these mythic themes are at all relevant to the hidden children. Like Moses, they were saved from an evil decree that made birth a sentence of death. Moreover, the hidden children share with their predecessors of antiquity a determination to show what one can do with a second chance at life. With the Lamed Vav Tzadikim, the 36 hidden righteous, the hidden children too were confronted with a world full of evil. This evil could not tolerate their innocence. Yet, against all odds, some of these children survived, and the world, perhaps undeservedly, is a better place because of their survival. Finally, the testimony and legacy of the hidden children may help us in ushering in the era in which, theologically speaking, the Third Temple, or its equivalent in terms of treating other humans with dignity and compassion, a time when the world cherishes rather than murders its children, will come. May this Third Temple come speedily and in our own day. Thank you. So,
Please ask questions, Professor Berger. He's here to answer.
or try. Yes, ma'am.
Is there any type of long-term study that's been done about how many of those children have returned to Judaism versus how many have not?
Yeah. Did everyone hear the question?
No.
Any long-term studies done about how many children, hidden children, returned to Judaism, and how many have not? How many have been lost, so to speak? Well, it's a very good question, but one of the issues here, one of the complicating issues, we don't know how many children were hidden. Moreover, not all of the hidden children were found after the war. We don't know their fate. But I can tell you this, and here's another irony, another paradox of the Holocaust. Holland, after the war, passed a law which was not anti-Semitic in intent. And here's the law. In order to reclaim your child after the war, you had to demonstrate that you were a fit parent. Now, what does a fit parent mean in non-traumatic circumstances? Here, a survivor or survivors who'd spent 1, 2, 3, or 4 years in a concentration camp or a death camp comes back, bad health, traumatized, many times not recognized by the child. Yes, I'm a fit parent. So that had the effect of separating some children from their parents. Abe Foxman did not want to return with his parents because he had been raised in their absence and given lots of love and attention and didn't want to go. Another story about a hidden child, there's a very important book called The Holocaust Kingdom by Alexander Donat. Now this was an unusual story. Alexander Donat was a journalist before the war. The whole family survived. He survived, his wife survived, and their son survived. But their son survived because he was in a hiding home, Christian foster parents. He did not want to go back after the war. Many children didn't because it wasn't their parent who was returning, it was a stranger who looked terrible. I don't know how many in terms of absolute numbers. I wouldn't even hazard a guess there, but most of those who were discovered by their parent or parents did eventually come back. That I do know. Yes, sir.
First, I want to thank you for that beautiful speech to enlighten the audience down here about the hidden children. I myself am a Holocaust survivor, sir. After the war, 8 months after the war, I went back. I knew I had a sister in Paris, France. And I found out my sister was hidden in a nunnery. Her daughter, my niece, she's still alive today. My sister died 2 years ago. Was hidden in a Catholic orphanage, and she survived. Until today, she still thinks of that orphanage as part of her family.
Thank you for sharing that, and she's right.
I myself, how did I knew about that? 8 months after I was liberated, 2 days before the liberation from Dachau, the Swiss Red Cross came to us. My name is Jack Repp. They came to us and asked if any one of us has any survivors anywhere in the world. We knew of the names. So I knew I had an uncle in Greenville, Texas. So I told him Greenville, Texas. Then my sister married about 4 years before the war and went to Paris, France. And I knew the name, the address, and that's it. After the war, 4 months after the war, after I was liberated, for 4 months I was in the hospital. After 4 months, I went out and worked for the Provost Marshal's office. With the Provost Marshal's permission, he gave me a pass to go to Paris, France. And that's how I found out. I went out to the place where my sister was living, the address I was given. And the people, like down here in America, if you live in a high-rise place, you know, they have a book. And during that time, my sister left everything with the people in that building down there, and they took her to a hiding place, to a Catholic nunnery. And she became a nun, and during the war, that's how she survived the war. She died, she was 92 years old 2 years ago.
Quite a story. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. Yeah.
We hear so much about the Polish anti-Semitism. Do we know where that, from whence that comes? Does it have to do with the Catholic Church or the country, or?
You
I
know,
mean, it's different than the Hitler thing.
my plane leaves at 1:30 tomorrow. I don't know whether, let me try to say some words about that. The Holocaust was not monocausal. There were lots of poison streams that fit into that terrible river of hate. One of them certainly was the teaching of contempt, which for about 1900 years describes the teachings, the anti-Jewish teachings of the Catholic Church. However, there also are other factors here. Nationalism, a kind of xenophobic nationalism. It's interesting to recall that Moses Isserles wrote to his co-religionist in the 16th century that you should come to Poland, here you will be safe. It may not be as glamorous or glorious as some of the other European countries, but here at least you'll be safe. Well, you know, some of the Polish kings treated the Jewish subjects very well. The rumor is that one of the kings even had a Jewish mistress. He must have liked her because they treated, King Casimir treated the Jews very well. However, between the wars, the interwar period, there was a struggle for control in Poland between two factions, one of whom was nationalistic and the other of whom was xenophobic. So the nationalist died and the xenophobes won. So all of the troubles of Poland were, of course, blamed on the Jews, not unusual. Poles have an image of themselves as their national poet in the 19th century wrote, Poland is the Christ among the nations. Guess who killed Christ, says the church. So there were problems there. On the other hand, and everybody, you say Poland, especially in a Jewish audience, and everybody, you know, it's terrible, terrible. And largely it's true. However, it's an incomplete picture. At Yad Vashem, the largest number of trees planted for the Chasidei Umot Ha'olam, the righteous among the nations, are those dedicated to Poland, people who helped in Poland. Of course, you might say they had the greatest chance to help too, but most didn't. There was also a national organization, Zhigota, that was dedicated to help the Jews. There are very few rare instances of anti-Semites helping the Jews. Nechama Tech writes about this in her book, When Light Pierced the Darkness. So you might say, how in the world would an anti-Semite help a Jew? Well, I think the analogy here is if somebody's walking their dog and another person kicks that dog, and that person says, well, you can't kick that dog. I can kick him, but you can't because it's my dog. Now that's a gross oversimplification, but there were a few rare cases of anti-Semites helping Jews. But Poland is, don't forget, the Poles also suffered under the Nazis, but one of the terrible competitions was a competition for martyrdom between the Jews and the Poles after the war. Remember the outbreak of the Polish convent controversy in 1989 and the planting of the crosses in Auschwitz? Well, several years after that, as a matter of fact, when we returned from this March of Hope and Remembrance, which Blake was on, my wife and I went to Poland in 2001, and we had an interview with a woman who at that time was the assistant director of the museum in Auschwitz, Auschwitz I. And she said this, we Poles, lost more in Auschwitz than we did in the forest massacre at Katyn. And now the massacre at Katyn was done by the Soviets, killing a lot of the intelligentsia, the army officers, etc. So for the Poles, Auschwitz, by which they mean Auschwitz I, the Stammlager, the main camp, that's a site of Polish martyrdom, like our Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. When Jews say Auschwitz, they mean Auschwitz II, or Auschwitz-Birkenau. Now, the Poles lost about 80,000 people in Auschwitz I. We lost nearly 1 million at Auschwitz-Birkenau. And Auschwitz III was the industrial complex surrounding the camps, where I.G. Farben and other of these great humanitarian industrialists were using slave labor until they couldn't use them anymore and sent them to the crematoria. But why was Poland so anti-Semitic? Well, the rule of thumb, they say, is that the further east you go in Europe, you went during the war, the more mixture you had of superstition and Christianity. And this is really a long discussion. I hope we can continue it at another time. Thank you for your question.
As I listen, I'm sensing some sort of commonality of experience between the hidden children and some second-generation children. Are you finding any psychological commonalities there?
Yeah, I think there are many commonalities, and Eva Fogelman has written about the similarities between hidden children and second generation. There are commonalities. I will say something about that in my remarks tomorrow, but there are indeed, except one crucial difference. The second generation did not have the experience that the hidden children had. Did not. Oh, your colleague.
When I watched the film Into Strangers' Arms about the Kindertransport, I was struck by all of those who had that experience, that they all thought, whether they had been saved, or in one case where the child was wrenched off the train because her parents couldn't bear to, they all thought that their parents had made the wrong decision. And they said, if it came again, I would choose to keep my child and die with that child. Because for a child, losing one's parents or one's parents giving the child up seems to be the most horrible thing. So I was wondering if you could say something about the attitudes of hidden children about this decision, or...
Yeah, it's a marvelous and insightful question. My late brother-in-law was on the last Kindertransport to leave, he and his brother. The next one was supposed to take their sister, but there wasn't a next one. And he told me once that once you lose your home, nothing is ever the same. Once you lose that sense of security and stability, no matter how successful you were, and he was quite successful, nothing is ever the same. I think that in this film that I mentioned, As If It Were Yesterday, there are several interviews with hidden children. And one of them, a woman, Fanny Filoset is her name, she said, I remember I must have been 3, and my mother hugged me and held me so tightly I could hardly breathe, and she was crying and her tears were coming over me, and I didn't know why. And then I got in this car, and I never saw her again. And years later I found out she'd been gassed at Auschwitz. I think that the hidden children have what we might call a sadness in the soul, no matter their success. You probably know about this book by Laurie Siegel, Other People's Houses. I strongly recommend that. Laurie Siegel is a well-published author, and this is her memoir about her experience living in something like 8 or 10 different houses in England after being on the Kindertransport. And she ends her book by saying, she lives in Manhattan, and today as I walk with my husband and my family, and I've got a sense of well-being, but I don't. I never feel at ease because of that experience of having everything taken away. And it's interesting, before the war, I seem only to be talking about assimilationist Jews, and I don't mean to do that, but Laurie Siegel's family was, they certainly were Jewishly knowledgeable, but they were assimilationists, like many Viennese Jews. And she remembers hearing a discussion when she was a little girl between her father and her uncle. And they were talking about the rantings of Corporal Hitler. And the father said, oh, he doesn't mean it, you know, he'll be gone in 6 months, and don't worry about it, he's a lunatic. And she remembers her uncle saying, you know, we Jews are a remarkable people. We see our neighbor loading his rifle. We hear him say he's going to use it to kill us. And we say, oh, don't worry about it, he doesn't mean it. So, do hidden children ever get over it? No. Do they have successful lives? Yes. But it forms that sadness of the soul. Thank you. Oh, thank you.
You could tell the audience